Good afternoon, everyone. We are a bit late, so we need to start now. This is one of the major programs of this year's Dhaka Talk Lab. As you know, Dhaka Talk Lab is basically a workshop teaching program. We used to do a number of sessions other than workshop, lab, and the teaching sessions. So one of the major programs, I must say, not one of the major programs, major attraction is Masterclass. In last 2 years, we had masterclasses of two major filmmakers around the world. Last year, we had with us Sean McAllister, the renowned UK filmmaker. This year, we invited Emma Davie. Perhaps many of you already met her, and yesterday we saw the beautiful film, very beautiful film, Becoming Animal. Emma is a Scottish UK filmmaker. She won a number of awards, and I think his last film has been to the festival circuits for long. I would invite Emma Davie to the dais, and this masterclass is basically a conversation. For that conversation, we have invited my mentor, particularly who I worship in many cases, Neil Paul.
We're very impressed by these chairs.
Yeah.
We just hope we don't get too comfy.
These are prepared made for, as I say,
Choose especially.
for presidents, prime ministers. Thank you all. Enjoy the masterclass.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. As Tarek says that, as a major attractions, as a major component of Dhaka Talk Lab, but I don't know why he has chosen such a minor couple to take care of this. Say it's a major event. First of all, thanks to Emma, it's a great opportunity to be with Emma, to have a kind of conversations that we have been continuing from the last 3 days. And last 3 days, while we are having conversations and interaction with filmmakers, we together understood that when we talk about reality storytelling, when we talk about slicing something which is significant to me or significant to us as a storyteller from life, it's really so challenging, so difficult. So it's filming, organization of fragments, then adding meaning to all those fragments, and finally taking a positions, whether and how you get engaged yourself as a filmmaker. I really personally believe that when you talk about reality storytelling, or so-called actuality storytelling, it's extremely boring. But reality is really banal, So, but we bring out things, we bring out our conversations from that reality that we live in, from our environment, and it cannot just done by doing the recording faithfully. We have to somehow, how to place myself at the eye, that's what's the conversation we can create. And that needs a lots of, I think that kind of, it's not only sensibility, how do we look at life? So we'll really love to explore Emma's beautiful world as a storyteller. And yesterday we have seen the film, Becoming Animal. This is not only a film, It's a kind of a visionary conversations, how the whole intellectualism or human sensibilities will look at our world. So again, so we'll have a conversations, but it is basically Emma will be speaking about the kind of motivation, the filming, organizations, characterizations, because all these things that we have been talking about, we heard 18 filmmakers or 17 filmmakers. We have been talking, and it's a whole dialogical experience is such that we all have these questions. What is the best possible way where I can plant my soul into the machine called camera, So all these things we'll try to explore from the perspective of a filmmaker, which I personally have a great respect in. So Emma, that's fine.
So this, can you hear me okay? No, I don't think this is working.
No.
Maybe I'll use yours. Oh, sorry. Okay, small point of having to turn it on, sorry. So this conversation is really an improvisation between us, and I think if you feel you want to feed things in, this is also fine. Because really it's a response, I feel, not just to the screening of the film yesterday, but to an earlier film I want to show. Because I think maybe my earlier film, I'm Breathing, deals with many of the dilemmas and issues and challenges that we have discovered here in the lab for so many filmmakers, which I think we all share as filmmakers. So we're going to be really nitty-gritty with this and look at scenes and unpick them and try and work out, why a film ends up the way it is and what the journey is on the way, and to really discuss the different elements. So we're going to take us very much through the filmmaking process. And I just thought I would begin with this very obvious word at the beginning, which is motivation. And I have to share a secret with you. And I think the secret that I have to share is I really don't want to be a filmmaker. I think it is such a hard thing to do. And it takes over so much of our life. And we end up I think, making so many sacrifices for this thing making a film. And yet every time I say, I don't think I want to be a filmmaker, something comes up. Some little story seems to land as if by magic in front of me and almost demand to be made. So I'm sure many of you here will have a similar sense of actually this whole business of why you end up making the films you end up making being an incredible mystery somehow. And it's a mystery that I think we try to understand throughout the process then of making the film. Why this? Why did I choose this subject? Because you have to be so careful of the little decisions you make at the beginning of a process will mean that you're locked into something for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, even 10 years. So what those little decisions are about, I think, contain so much insight into how we can then understand our film. So I think some films for me come because I have an absolute volition for it, and I think the one that we saw yesterday, Becoming Animal, was like that. It really felt I really need to make this film. But the film I'd like to talk a little bit more about today is an earlier film that I made a few years ago called I Am Breathing, which didn't begin like that. It didn't begin because I felt in any way I had to make it, but it began very much because maybe it had to be made, which is a different thing. So I explain a little bit of the background of the film, then I'd like to show a clip, and then I'd like to discuss a bit about some of the decisions about filming, why decisions of making the film the way we made it happened. So what this film was about, what happened was there was a friend of mine who knew somebody who was who was very ill with an illness called motor neuron disease that some of you might have heard of. It's a paralysing illness. And he was a young father, he was 33, he was a brilliant man, he was an architect. He had a little baby son. And within 6 months of the son being born, he was completely paralysed from the neck down. He couldn't swallow, he couldn't breathe properly apart from a breathing machine, and he knew that he didn't have long to live. And basically his father had died of this illness, his grandfather had died of his illness, and he was very scared that his baby son would get it. So he began writing a blog, and he began sharing with people his story in order to raise awareness of the illness. And he wanted television to do news reports on it, and he wanted it to be written about in journals and magazines. And my friend, who was a friend of his, said, I think you have to meet him and see if you can film something for him. So I went on a journey to meet this man, and really wasn't sure about making a film at all. But I want to show a little clip, and then I want to talk in more detail about camera choices, filming character, and how you work with your doubts. Because I think we all have doubts when we film some intense suffering. And I know many of you are making films here which involve really filming such difficult life situations. And it makes you wonder, if somebody's in the midst of what they're going through, what right have I to pick up the camera in the midst of this? What right have I to make a story out of somebody's life when they're going through what they're going through? We've heard of stories of people in exile, stories of people losing their homes, stories of people who have many other problems related to so many issues that people throughout the world are facing just now. And also here very much with refugees and many countries. We choose to make films when people are in the midst of really dealing with so much. But we have to ask so many questions. So I want to just see a little bit, if it's okay to begin with this, Nilopal. We see a little bit, and then I talk a little bit about the decisions around that and how we get to this. Okay, thank you. So it's just for the beginning.
Lights off, please.
And we still haven't really seen him. We've only seen just his lips moving a little bit, and we've seen the point of view that he has on the world, but we haven't seen his body. And I'm going to just talk a little bit about that decision, and I'm also going to talk about other decisions that led to this little tiny opening being the way that it is. And first of all, I want to go back to the first thing that I said, which is sometimes I have a reluctance to enter another's suffering when making a film like this. Because I have so many questions of, do I have a right to turn the camera on? And I think what happened in this instance was the co-director, who was a fiction filmmaker, Maureen McKinnon, and myself, had many long discussions about why are we there with the camera? What is this about? What motive do we have for turning it on as soon as we go into his room? And instead of sort of deciding not to make the film because of those questions, we decided to use those questions to motivate what the camera does. So I guess the question was, what is it like to be you, Neil? His name was Neil. In this situation, 34 years old, you can't move from the neck down, you have the son that you want to hold and embrace and you can't do so. What's it like to see the world from your perspective? So this is what made us choose this decision of, we see the window with the shut curtains, we get a sense of him, this is just his view in the world. We see his wife with his son, he can't touch his son. And we see also just this little screen that is his only thing that he can really control. but also even that he can't quite control. So we didn't have a budget at this stage. You can see it's filmed very simply by me. I'm not a professional cinematographer, with not a very expensive camera. But I think what happened, or what had to happen, was because we didn't have money at that stage and because things had to happen really quickly, everything had to be about how we frame. So everything became about the meaning that we put within the camera frame and the decision that the camera frame makes about whether it's tight, whether it's wide, whether it sees his face, whether it doesn't see his face. So, in a way, the job of editing already started by the time we picked up the camera. And the job of editing was very much about, as I said, in that stage, of really trying to enter the body. Because for me, I think filmmaking is very much not just about the mind and the heart, but I think it's so much about this. When you come to the cinema, you bring your bodies. You watch the film with your body. And in a way, I wanted to have a sense of, from a sensorial point of view, what is it to be you? How can I show what it is to be stuck? So of course, some of the filming is stuff that we did at the time, but I'm sure you clever people can spot, yeah, but that wasn't done at the time. I'm sure you get an idea of some of the shots that maybe we did afterwards in the edit. Maybe not, but some of them, like for example, the ceiling came afterwards in the edit. All the shots that you see of the beginning, of the feet running on the beach, were actually my feet, I'm sorry to disappoint you, running on a beach. So of course we lie as documentary makers. We always lie. But I hope that we lie to tell a greater truth. And I think, a lot of you, when you talk about your films, I feel like you're very purist about them in a way. You say, my film is observational. Like, this is really the only way that we can do justice to our characters. But I think in this little opening, I hope you get a sense that actually, if we had only used observational footage, it would have been too much. It would have been too painful. And in fact, we got to a certain stage of our edit with the film where we realised actually, if a film is too painful, nobody can go with it. So this made us actually use other aspects of his life in a way right from the start. So I'm just going to press play and carry on and show you a little bit more, just to show how we had to deal with who he was. I think you'll notice that some of the filming isn't amazing. And often as directors, I know that if we've shot things ourselves, we're very precious about not using something that isn't as good as it can be. But sometimes you just have to. Because sometimes actually the energy that it communicates about emotion or about the story is actually more important than your ego about whether you've got the best shot in the world. So I'm going to just show you just a little bit more and show how we actually managed to deal with his suffering a little bit. So is that okay? Or do you want to ask a bit more?
Questions with regard to the clip. We see that there's a kind of a very beautiful micro-arting, the way you are introducing your character. Like, I think you have used his own home video on Twitter. That's the one close-up is coming in the beginning. And as it was just feeling the wind, and there's a chit-chat, that's the page, But it's a kind of, we see that when you come home, the curtain, wife opens the curtain, see the kids, and you should see the machines, and you introduce that he says, I am blah 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 victim of what is this, motor neurosis, and he's also a blogger that you introduce, and it's being translated in the computer, and then it's beautiful that the wife comes with the kid, ask her, then the machine, and in the soundtrack, breathing. It's extremely dramatic. So there's a kind of, you had a choice, which is almost a pre-decisions that how we building up the scene, you know.
That's right.
So it's a beautiful micro-arcing within me, and it's a very good way of gradually you are introducing your character,
Yes.
but hiding certain things, you know,
That's right.
keeping something away from us.
That's right.
But with the sound, with the very structured
Yes.
way, you give us a kind of anticipations about the character, what he
Yes.
has been going through, and then we see the very close up with the lips.
Yes.
So it's a kind of, there is a, as we are talking about,
Yes.
the organizations, you know, the way. So it's a kind of thing that it's clearly
Yes.
very, very, I'm like to say, very clinically, very step
Very
by step,
constructed.
you know, absolutely, yeah, very straight.
If I'd gone in there and hadn't thought what I was doing with the camera, I would have not been able to make this film, because he had such a short time while he was still alive. I knew every time I turned the camera on mattered. So even though it wasn't the best camera in the world, it was like every shot had to be so alive and had to communicate something. And you know, I think for me, the best cinematographers are often from Eastern Europe. And I think it's because they bring such a philosophy to their cinematography. I think the best cinematographers are philosophers. They ask questions with the camera, they ask questions with the frame. And I hope that also part of what that's about is leaving space for an audience's mind. Because by not seeing all of him, you go, who is he? But I think the other really important thing is that you talked about, you see the machines.
In fragments.
Yes, but you know, when I first met Neil, I was very nervous. I think I don't know if some of you who've entered situations of quite intense suffering can identify with that, but I remember walking into this room and hearing this sound of the breathing. And he was sitting in the corner on that big chair, and it felt like he was half machine, half man. And in a way, his humanity had become eaten up by this machine. And so I had a sense of, as soon as you see that, you feel alienated. So part of our mission in the film was how to liberate the inner mind and not see reality as just the body, but as the mind and the soul. Because interestingly, when he writes the blog, he communicates with such freedom. And in fact, going back to the observational thing, if we had just based the film on the material of him as a body, going through what he went through, the film would have been unbearable. You wouldn't have felt anything. You would have just felt too much, too much. So this question of how we enter the inner world of the character is not just through the eyes, I think. I think it's also through all kinds of other means. And in fact, the first time we met him, I said to him, Neil, how should we film you? And he said, always the architect. I think you begin the film with the sound of breathing, and then I'll die and you end when the breathing machine turns off. And of course we ended up doing what he suggested, but
That's what we did also.
we did do that. But I was just going to say about the blog, about when he says, I am Neil, when he writes these words, the fact that he had a voice gave him power. And I think one of the things about filming people who are suffering is that the camera can rob them of power sometimes. And so the ethical question of how do I give you power back on the screen becomes a question not just of ethics, but a question of aesthetics and a question of actually what then motivates not only the camera, but the edit, the choice of the blog, the choice of writing, everything. So as soon as we thought we're going to use this blog, as filmmakers we felt liberated because because we could use other images, like the feet running.
Those, this computer screen definitely they have shot later.
The computer screen of him doing the blog, like I Am Neo, no, not the I Am Neo bit we shot later, in fact graphic designer did it all. And we edited his blog for that. But the other bit is the live bit of him being frustrated with the machine.
Of course.
Yeah. So now we just play the next little bit, just to show you this sense of what we had to do to really deal with to not make a film that was too intense and unwatchable. So let's have a look at the next bit.
Lights off.
Okay, so I was just going to say a few things just about that moment just afterwards. It's very ordinary. It's very banal, actually. But I think ordinary moments, in terms of character-based documentaries, can be like glue. They can be so important. And I think often as filmmakers, well, I don't know about you, but often I forget to film them. Often I think it's not important. There's a Danish storytelling teacher called Måns Rukhoff, who describes this thing called the natural story and how important what he calls the natural story is. I don't know if any of you have heard of this, but he says this thing that I think is quite interesting, that in a drama or in a documentary, if you have a story of something we all do, like we all get up in the morning and eat breakfast, but you put a twist in it, then you hook an audience. So you have the natural story, the natural thing we all do, but with the twist, with the subversion. And of course, the twist here is that he can't move, but he's still trying to engage with family life. And I think his humour makes us open our hearts to him and makes it kind of bearable to be with him. So I think when we came to put the film together, it felt like that really was what would allow us to be with the more intense moments.
And this one definitely that what you have said, that banal, in the sense it's little absolutely ordinary fragments, and but you are connecting him the way he is, in the way as a kind of a soul, half body, half nation, but that's while mother is trying to ask the boy, so this is a kind of a participation, and that time we see the very normal, very natural way he's really participating into the kind of it's a family, and little playful, and says dad will have something, and the mother comes, It's a very simple moment, but of course it's a very significant moment as far as the kind of correlations, and particularly Neil, we know the way he is, Somehow, I think in the film it's the first conversation we have with Neil that way. That appears to be normal,
Yes.
appears to be soulful. That way it's quite, it really drags us for the first time possibly in the film to Neil, the way he is,
Maybe just here one thing to say is, he had his own motive for us making the film, which was very much, he had an issue. We talk here a lot about films with issues. And his issue was that he had this illness and he was so scared of passing it on to his son because it was hereditary. And it was bad enough that he had it and his father had it and his grandfather had it. But he really wanted to raise awareness, so the illness stopped. So that was his motive. So when we began filming him, we'd come in with the camera and he'd sit down and he'd begin talking about the illness. He'd give the statistics of the illness, he'd give the number of people who died, he'd give all this kind of stuff. And of course we would come away feeling overwhelmed by this. And we would have to say, Neil, this will never tell your story. And in a way, part of the journey then was to work out, well, what is our motive then? What is it for us?
Yeah, precisely what actually really impact to do, because it's so difficult to even go close to this character, with a camera and really observe or record him.
Yeah.
It needs guts. At times, it's could be ethical also.
Yes.
But definitely something was there for you as a filmmaker. Possibly you were collaborating with him to spread the message and create the awareness, and you become an integral part of him, and you take up the responsibility to spread his own messages, across the world, to make people aware of it. So I think that possibly that is how what we are discussing in the morning. That when we filmmakers, meet our characters, see the reality, we are so bogged down by the issues, problems, and all these things of the characters, the reality that we encounter. It is often, it's me, the way I react to, the way I feel about it, and that way, because the first time when I saw the film, it was really unbearable for me. And particularly the soundtrack was haunting us going back home, and that's terrible. The sound, breathing, in and out. So somehow, but I took that responsibility, becoming part of Nell, to look at his problem, that it is your problem too. Is it? Or I'm really it's enhancing too much. It is something that you become part of his emotional world, his crises, his challenges, and you integrate yourself with his issues, and take it up to the world.
But isn't it hard as a filmmaker, because you feel this empathy, but at the same time you have to be quite strategic, and the strategy still has to be, the film isn't made with your issue, the film is made in the space between you and me. This is where the film is.
Of course, that objectivity has to be there. In the morning when I see the crow coming around courtyard, it has its also strategic placement, when you crow, everything. So it's a kind of being always driven by a kind of some kind of an equation and limitations. We have to have the strategic placement, and without strategies, we can't communicate. That has to be in the forefront.
And I think for us, one of the things that became a really interesting question was, if we were heading towards the end of our lives the way he was, what would have meaning? And I guess that's why the everyday, film in the everyday then becomes so important. Because it felt a bit like, in a way, the film became a quest for that, to a certain extent. And, I think sometimes it can feel a bit selfish as a filmmaker that you also have to have your own question. But it felt for us very necessary, because otherwise we would have made just a campaigning film. And in fact, the film did do a campaign, but that wasn't the primary thing. The primary thing was that it was just working as a film. So I think these different layers is what allowed that. But yeah.
So then I was just a little disturbed, again, when I saw it first time. But it's very interesting that how you have used other components, like which is a very, very important thing, that was his blogs, and kind of it's a physical ambience through basically presence of audios. Most of the time we even don't see him, but inside the room we see the kind of a struggling, deep breathing in and out. So it's many, many ways you have really developed him as a kind of as a full-scale character, as a normal human being, the way we are, So it's quite a lot of strategies were also involved to really building him up as a character, because you have, I think, used the home videos quite a lot, the memories that he has recorded. That's, I think, one of the most the strongest component,
Yes.
and So these are the fragments, these are the elements, material, memories recorded by him, by families, home videos, and the ambience he lives in, and his blog. And that is how, blending all elements together, you finally really build up a kind of a character, the way he is.
Yeah, and I think maybe that whole thing of trying to find the language of the film is such a long task for this kind of project, and I think I want to go back to this question of how we understand what our film's about, because I think we've been asking you this question again and again, but what's it about? And it's so annoying when somebody asks you that question, because we don't know the answer, and it feels like it's a question that in a way you probably have a different answer for every few months in your film. I don't think there's just one answer, and it felt like that question in a way guided us very much. And in fact, the opening scene, I think in a way the film is also very much about communication. I think that's one of the major themes, is actually, he says at one stage in the film, because it was threatened that he would lose the power of speech, and then he said, I don't want to live anymore. And that's so painful. If you lose the power of speech and you can't tell anyone what you need, and you can't communicate how much you love people, because he was such a loving man. So in a way, communication became one thing, but it also had this essence of, this question of actually the film itself became his legacy, and the making of the film became a legacy. So in a way, the film contains its own memory as it's being made. So it's looking back in a way, but it's also looking forward. So in a way, we were conscious of this. And we were lucky that we worked with, he died just 6 months after we started filming. We only filmed him in total about maybe 18 days, not very much at all. And after he died, we couldn't really look at the footage. It was kind of too painful. But at one stage, we began putting some kind of cut together, and we had a Danish editor we were working with called Jens Jensen, who's a very well-known, very brilliant editor. And he came and he looked at the footage, and he wanted to see, I want to see the last bit of filming you have with him, which of course was not us, but was somebody else, and was when he was really ill. And he looks at it and he leans forward and he says, it's interesting. And of course he had an objectivity that for us was completely impossible. But I think the question is that haunted us was that if we have to earn that moment, if we are to use a moment when someone is really communicating about their last moments of life, what earns us the right to do that? How are we allowed to do that? And I think somehow by us taking that question, strangely enough, it meant that when the film played and it travelled a lot, people didn't ask whether we had the right or not, which was very interesting, I think. And I think it's because his voice was so present. And I think his presence is what allowed this whole journey to happen.
Also, he was always also communicating with so many followers, and updating them about his health, anytime soon, what is the situations, cutting jokes, making lots of other communications. So he was alive in the minds of the people, So his followers also, I think, but a lot of people were following him also. A blog.
And in terms of the pitch, which might just be interesting for you to hear, because so many of you are about to do pitches, we pitched it once, and everybody said, "Well, that was very nice. We won a prize, but we didn't get any money." Everybody was crying, and at the end, they were like, "No, they didn't give us money." Then we realised we had to change it, and we put in this little bit with the phone, and then suddenly money began coming in, and then people began to commit. So I think it's an interesting question, this thing of, yet again, this thing of character. And this danger, I think, sometimes when somebody's going through something very dramatic, that we focus too much on the drama, and then we don't really get to know them somehow, because people are in such an extreme mode in drama. So somehow these other moments became like the lifeblood of the film, and it felt so important to find that lifeblood.
Particularly with regard to this film, the man will be dying very soon. Okay, so while we're shooting him, at the same time you know that he'll be dying very soon. He's a dying man. It's sad. Days are being numbered, As a filmmaker, as a human being, how did you deal it? It is something that you are between life and death. And I know that you spoke about objectivity, You spoke about that filmmakers are always lying. I don't believe that, anyway. But it's really, I'm curious to know, and also our audience would be really happy to know that it's really something that you've gone through. The man, every day you're sharing, almost living with him, being with him, and you know that you'll be dying. So standing between life and death, I just know that how you, not as a filmmaker, or even as a storyteller, or a human being, how your soul vibrated.
It's such a difficult question.
No, it's
but maybe I can just try and answer it by saying it more than anything felt like an incredible thing to be let in on, and we had to see it as that, not just as something awful. And I think he saw it as that. I think he himself began to see it not just as a terrible thing, but that also maybe something in him was coming out in this process. So maybe the best thing that he had was curiosity about this time of his life. And we had to honour him with curiosity too. But of course it was very painful and very sore, and we felt so much compassion for the family, and really, questions about
I think
the right of art in the face of this. I think.
maybe the strength of the character, and
Yeah.
how he rationalizes his kind of this
Yeah.
situations and existence, and
Yes.
also possibly he was motivated by the idea that he's doing something really good and great for the next generation to come about this
I think
awareness, and
I think this
he
is
has a motivation, strong
I
motivation.
think this is what happened, and this is what gave him energy to continue, was that.
Mm.
And then it gave us energy too, because we knew that we would pick up on that and carry that on for him. So that energy actually made me think about the energy that you give beyond your life, and how your actions resonate so much. So I think the film had to do justice to that so much. So I think
Can we say clip, next clip?
I think we could see the next clip, and we can talk maybe a bit more about maybe about sequences.
Yeah,
something.
that's- You have been talking about sins to everybody, You wanted moments. Now let's go to moments. Yeah.
I was just going to say something about that sequence where his wee boy comes out into the swing and is playing on the swing with his friend, and there's a rather agonising moment where he's on the chair and the window's behind him and the child's playing on the swing and he can't be with the child. And I guess those little moments felt like they made all the difference. Because in a way the whole film is about time. And so, like any filmmaker, how we use time becomes so unbelievably crucial. And so there's different ways of using time going on in the film all the time. There's this abstracted time, but this very real time where things unfold. We had to always be so alert to how we build a sequence around that unfolding and what it says. So it's not just a sequence of a boy playing outside, but somehow, I had to move really quickly while I was filming to, okay, this is kind of meaningless if it's just a shot of you playing. But if Neil's in the foreground and you're there, then it becomes meaningful. So I guess it's all the time thinking how time makes things meaningful in terms of a sequence.
And story-wise also, you are connecting 3 generations.
Yes.
That's Oscar, father, grandfather.
Yeah.
Then this somehow you connect this, that is so important also story-wise. This is kind of a disease, hereditary. Might be really impacting Oscar also.
Yes.
And then you go to the home videos.
Yes.
The father, the parties, and when we see the things playing with so somehow we go back, to the memories, recorded memories, and we can really reconnect. And the whole issue of 3 generations, somehow it's being fun and connected, and it's the scene is quite the anxiety also he expressed, earlier, in terms of, and that you also know that it is something that can really perpetuate through generations,
Yes.
and putting them together, it's quite a wonderful kind of way of bringing things together as a kind of integrated whole,
Yes, which I think is what
using time and memories together.
Yeah, which I think is what the blog does and what that allows. But
that blog actually it was later on you did for that. Time is passing very fast,
But this is just one thing I wanted to say. We were really struggling with our edit, and I'm sure many of you can sympathise with this. That you have all this material together, and you have this. So we edit first of all the footage that we shot. We edit the home movies, and we also edit the blog. And we come up with this rough structure. And somehow, it kind of works and people are moved, but it's not quite working. And we can't quite work out how. And it feels like often in these moments, and with the other film that we saw yesterday also, it's the same. There's one little key that's missing. And it's always the most obvious thing, but you can't find it. And actually, that blog there is the key. That's why I wanted to show you this little bit. That blog that says the meaning of life and other questions. Somehow that allowed Neil's dilemma to be our dilemma. Of, in a way, what memories of these moments with his friends, being daft over parties, laughing with his mother, whatever. These sort of meaningless moments suddenly become meaningful. And in a way, that sort of felt like it drew everything together. It's so simple, but somehow it feels like always there's just one little thing that you need to find or say that has that kind of layer of meaning or layer of depth that you're looking for. And what I found when I was making this and the other film is that actually, you think that you know what your film is about, but in fact, you can never be in that position of knowing. It's a very dangerous position to know. And actually, I feel like a feature needs so many more layers than you can possibly begin to imagine. And so many more explorations and questions than you can even begin to imagine too. So, yet again, coming back to the pitches that you're going to do, I think that's why it's so good to discuss together. And it's certainly something I get so much from co-directing, which I do quite a lot, is that we can have these discussions and we can keep saying, what's it about? Oh, that's not enough. What else is it about? What else is it about? What else is it about? Until we find this key that hopefully can unlock other things. Because ultimately I think that we look at a film to understand ourselves better. And so it felt really important to have that. Yeah.
Yesterday we saw your film, and today the clips. It's 2 different kind of films. One one is character driven, And anytime we talk about documentary storytelling, it is like we talk about characters, we talk about most of the time 3 act, 5 acts. It's quite outdated also to me. That's you have to have a character, would be the vehicle of your stories, And of course, there's some alternative filmmaking. So the two of our friends, Adrus and Boris, they think differently. We also thought differently yesterday, So that's a very simple and stupid questions. You don't have characters, You don't have to build up so-called dramatic arc, How do you tell stories then?
But I think it's the same question. I think it's actually the same process. Maybe with different ethical questions, but the same process of why am I doing this? Why am I picking up the camera in the first place? What's this about? What is it that I'm trying to understand? And really, not this question because I think it's the right question to ask, but really this kind of, I feel like until I can touch a question that's been keeping me awake for many nights, I'm not touching on the right thing for my film. So until it's so obvious, then it's not right. So I think when it became clear that it was this last film, this question of why have we lost our connection to nature? It's such a simple, stupid question, but somehow it was enough to start a journey. And I think as long as the question is really genuine enough and you hold on to it, I think it's so dangerous to try to please anybody and try to please funders. Or somebody asked me yesterday, oh, but how did you get funding for something that's so experimental? And I think the answer is don't try and please anybody. I think that's really an important thing to say, but having said that, you have to be so rigorous yourself. And I think with this film, I love essays. I love non-fiction. I love reading books that are essays. I like essays that are poetic. I love a filmmaking tradition that's an essay tradition, because I think it's capable of actually trying to articulate something of what's happening to us just now in the world. And so it felt like the only form for this was an essay. But it's a very similar process of constantly dealing with what you don't know. And I think touching uncertainty and dealing with that monster of uncertainty is what I think informs the process for me. I wish it was more comfortable. I really wish it was a more comfortable, easy process, but it doesn't seem to be. It just seems to be that you have to deal with this mystery all the time, all the way through.
I will. How long we are talking actually? What's the time now?
6.
Yeah?
Another 15 minutes.
15.
Maybe we should show a bit of the...
Yeah. So now I will show you a clip. Okay?
You show me a clip. Okay.
Becoming animal. Your we just see.
Get the lights off.
You have to go to audience person. I'm quite fascinated by this sequence for two reasons. Two kinds of contrasts you use in terms of a short transitions. Look at the tree, moving. Somehow after a point, you feel the wind physically, and as the force of the wind is enhancing, increasing, you start feeling it physically. So there, definitely what I think that it says quite a lot in terms of, as the time is though, that it's the time is responsible, the quality of time that you held within the frame, that gives you that sensations, That's, you can feel the wind. And it's quite a long time, the same shots, you know. So you wait, and suddenly get the moment. But when you got the shot, it's definitely, it could have been a better transitions, you know, from moving tree to the water. But suddenly camera goes up. It's a blue, blank sky. It creates a vibe. What was what? This was a very, definitely, it's a choice. When you edit a single from here and there, it goes to a kind of a process of selectivity, you know. So what was the kind of motivation? Can you tell me? I was curious, you know.
Why did we do the blue sky?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a sense for me of also the sense of the space around the tree becoming part of this. It's almost something that you can't explain. It just felt right. But I know we had a big argument in the edit about that shot. Because I wanted longer and longer and longer, and he wanted less. And I think maybe I won. So maybe...
But did you supported the blue sky?
I think I like the blue sky.
Oh.
But you would have had it earlier. But
No, I loved it. It is strange.
But these are the kind of discussions. Yeah. But I think this shot was a bit like, talking about the key for the film, I think this shot was a bit of a key for me.
Yeah. It's a language that you are describing,
yes.
From the kind of the trees and their own conversation between the leaves, you know.
Yes.
And then you come to water.
Yeah.
Okay. There you go for, there are 7 or 8 water shots, and every time you change lens, you change the camera positions. You know. There suddenly you are becoming Eisensteinian fragmentation school, where you, that's always, there's a different point of view. So many fragments are coming, and duration of the shots are relatively gradually decreasing, you know. Why?
Well, I think it's all about meaning here again, and it's almost like, in a way, every bit of the leaf of the tree sounds slightly different. And you know, if you walk by a river, every bit sounds a bit different. It doesn't all make the same sound.
No,
so
of course.
So it's important that we show these different little bits to bring out it's almost like the specificness of the overall music.
Yeah, that specificity. When I was watching, you know, I was thinking, you know, why don't I see the water crossing the stone and then falling down, taking a slow, and because this language of water is or the speeches of water into stuck to it. It's very sharp, short. It doesn't engage me. And then suddenly, this is very dramatic editing in a way. You cut to a very slow motion shot, you know, which again you are artificially extending time. So this is, and this particular sequence in my 3 I see it kind of so much of conscious intervention, you know, into the process of editing. And yes, you're attempting something fascinating, but
I mean, I think this film is always trying to remind us of the process of making the film, because the act of looking and the act of recording is so much part of what the whole examination and the whole exploration is about. That there can still be a magic in something as constructed as that is kind of fascinating, because it takes us into, yet again, our inner ear and our inner world, and something about cutting to silence makes us hear sound more.
Silence is great,
yes.
But it's a slow motion shot also at the same time.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and the slow motion
shot. But
shot.
I was really shocked. It was slapped up my face, you know, when I saw that slow motion shot.
Yes.
Suddenly, that the language he was trying to evolve, you know,
yes.
it just snatched away from me.
Yes, because it's not realism. We're not.
Yeah,
making,
of course, you know. Realism has said that realism doesn't speak. You know.
Exactly.
You make it speaking, you know.
We need to
make it speak.
We need to kind of keep waking up to the image, and I think this is what we try to do so much.
Boris, you were listening to us? No. Can you respond to it, you know? And we are talking about the kind of transition of time and the quality of time that you hold in the frame and creating something. And we see also the contrast, that I was telling that about the slow motion shot was a shock for me, and somehow the conversation it intends to create, it is taken away from me. That's what we're discussing. And suddenly I thought you can really add to kind of the dialogue that we're having.
I think Emma is always behind what she says, so I trust her decision also on this moment when she cuts the sound, for example, or does the slow motion, or does the little experimental leaf rattling scene. My position is that everything is allowed, and we tend to overthink conceptually when we want to introduce like such a radical moment in films. Sometimes it's very refreshing because it's very arresting. If you do it too often, it becomes tedious. If you do it just once, it might be too disturbing, and it all comes down, to Emma's confidence, basically. And and that's a problem. I think that's why they edited the film on their own, because if you bring in an editor from outside to edit your material, that editor can never have their confidence or the right or
The spirituality.
or whatever the moment this epiphany moment to do that at that moment. So that's why that's what the director does, and that's what this genre of documentary filmmaking offers us, is this freedom to do such crazy free things that we've seen in Audrius's movies and in her movies and in my movie and in their movies.
Okay. We'll see your movies tomorrow or day after.
I think it's Friday. Okay.
Now I have one question to you. You said the tree shot is experimental. Why you say that? And how do you think that is experimental?
Well, it reminds me of an aesthetic of earlier experimental films where people are doing anything from scratching film stock and playing with the early video, digital video possibilities with cheap special effects in the beginning. People are trying all kinds of things, and it's been done in the history of cinema many times. So the question is now, how often are we going to recycle such things? For me, like, the film is not experimental in what she's trying to say. I think it's very genuine, like this idea of connecting.
That's what I'm also saying, that it's so much of kind of something that you really play with the time and
I don't think that her film altogether is experimental, because what she's trying to do is a very essential thing. Our connection with nature is an absolute, maybe the ultimate topic. And also what I did in my documentary about nothing, I don't think it's an experimental documentary. I say that nothing is the last and first documentary theme. But then we use relatively standard film language, like shots of nature and a little bit of commentary here and there, a little bit of making up, meta scenes. And then this moment, refreshing moment comes, so refreshing aesthetically or just like enhancing or like uplifting moment with the rattling of trees and with this superposition, and it's almost a little some sort of, cosmical acceleration.
Yes.
That
cosmic celebrations. That's great. Thank you. I'll go to Adrus, Adrus, what is the kind of we're talking about the sense of time that it depicts, what it exudes, without referring to Andrei Tarkovsky, Adrus.
How you imagine I would answer your question without referring to Tarkovsky? Impossible. No, but I think that the time is the most essential thing in cinema. It is a subject and object. And because the documentary cinema is made of time, and the time, this is not the time we are speaking the time that's something objective. It's always subjective time. And this is what documentary can do. It can reflect this subjectivity. You know, we are here 2 days, and we talked in the car. We said, "Oh, it seems, because so many things are happening, it's so intense. It seems like we are here 7 days or 10 days." And vice versa, it could be 1 year, and you see, "Oh, it just passed away." So this is what we're dealing with. This is very relative and very beautiful concept of time. And for me, this what Emma did in her film, it is going back to the Lumieres, actually. This was forgotten. The first, everybody is speaking about the train, but before it was, or maybe after the breakfast outside, and people were moved, not what is going in the first, in the front, but they were amazed by the leaves moving in the wind. That was made the biggest impression for them. And afterwards, with this Méliès and all this, everything, this direction has been forgotten, as Tarkovsky said.
I think this also is.
Just one. Sorry. So do you think that the long shots, stretching the time and going beyond the sense of time that really shot can offer, we are going to be beyond that. So it's real and artificial time is really extended. Then you have all these water shots of fragments and changing angle, changing volumes, and then the slow motion shots. I think at the end, also it really enhances the complexities of the time that she is talking about. Do you agree with that?
It's coming. I think this is coming back to you. Yes. How long can you can watch for 20 minutes the water in the river? So why or you can watch 10 minutes sky? Why should it be different in cinema? Of course. So it's coming back to something not imposed by the structure or editing, but something that is really natural, and that's inside of us.
And yet again, as I've said before, we lie to tell a truth. And this is another form of lying.
Mm-hmm.
We're constructing something. We're conscious we're constructing something.
Yeah, of course.
And so, we have to play. And part of it is just playing. I mean, we're talking here like there's a big thing and a big purpose, but it's also just to play.
We try to evoke something,
Yes.
that is not there in the reality.
Yes.
That's a
and
constant
it's also this thing that, as I was saying earlier, the film is made in your minds as an audience. It's not made anywhere else, and so you bring so much already. So, I think
Paul, let's subscribe your sense of time, the time that you're talking about with regard. You have something specific to say with regard to the scene that we're talking about?
You should actually ask my brother, he's the intellectual of the family. No, what can I say? I'm not a person who has a lot of high thoughts about it. I can only say that time for me, certainly in this kind of films, like Emma said it yesterday, it makes me float away, it makes me happy, it makes me relaxed, and it makes me think about things. I'm not a filmmaker. I always tried to help people who know what they're doing and who are creating something beautiful that makes the audience feel that, the 80 minutes or whatever that we set in this cinema, we received something beautiful. That is the only time that counts for me. And then I trust my friends filmmakers to do it in the right way. That's all I can say about it.
a good stop.
Okay, so we really spoke a lot and don't want to be repetitive. Is Mr. Ryota Koten is around in the theatre? No. Because, anyway, so can we go back to the audience a little bit to have something to audience?
Yes.
Can you really open to that? We don't have much time, although I'm sorry that we are really so immersed and bogged down with our own perception of cinema. So, if you want to ask any specific questions, short. So Emma is here, I can talk to you. But I was yearning to ask them questions now. Okay.
Emma, you were just going to say something. Twice you stopped, and
Yes,
so I would like to hear that.
I feel like I just want to remind people who are here to pitch, really, to take permission to make their films the way they want to make them. I think sometimes I just go back to this thing that I think that we sometimes try to please people too much, and I think it's so important that you give yourself permission to try new things out. I just want to encourage you in that journey of. I've been so moved by the commitment that people have to stories where you've been spending so long with the people and the situations that are such difficult situations so often. And your courage has really moved me so much. And maybe one of the things that this whole process of trying to find words for film is that it, in a funny kind of way, doesn't destroy the mystery, but can enhance it. And I guess the word pitch is such an ugly word because it sounds like it's about selling, and I really hope you don't feel that it's about that, but that it's about trying to find kindred spirits. Yeah, but I think, I struggle to find words for my own work, so I totally sympathise with it. But it feels like somehow when we do, something speaks back to us. For some reason, I don't know why, but we can't do it by ourselves as filmmakers. We really can't. It's impossible for us to develop these things without this kind of thing, this kind of arena or this kind of help. So it's not we're always working with an invisible audience and a present audience. And that's what I love about cinema, is that sense of actually, I feel like this last film that I made, I feel like it keeps changing. And it's already finished. Which is a strange thing to say, but it feels like that. It feels like it keeps having different lives. And same with the film before. It became something completely different after it had finished. So, in a way, a wee bit like the Becoming Animal story of we touch something and it touches us back. A film is like that. We have to begin to hear the film and begin to sense it and begin to work out what is it trying to tell me and what is it trying to guide me to do. And I think this moment when you're able to really hear it and really feel it is a really magical moment when it begins to carry you and take you. And I think some of you are beginning to feel that. And yeah, I think that's what I always look out for as a filmmaker. And I like co-creating because then I don't own it. Then it kind of seems like it just has its own life that I just try and feed. So what an incredible thing to be able to witness the beginnings of the lives of your work, just to say. Yeah.
I have a question.
Emma, hi. I want to know more about Neil. I have some questions that when we see Neil writing as a blogger, we can see him, his unbearable freedom as a blogger he enjoyed. And he was half machine and he was a man with a machine. Half man, half machine. But I don't know what is the end. But I want to know more about Neil. At the end, will we see Neil as a human being or without machine or in the middle there was a sequence there his boy was playing in a swing and I don't know was he watching or not. It's his point of view or not. I can imagine we are listening his breathing, but sometimes he was talking, but his breathing and his talking was not matching, and his breathing was haunted me. So I want to know about Neil furthermore. Thank you.
Is related. Can I just add? Initially, with the Neil story, you were saying that you tried to make it as much less intense as it is possible because it is already a very heavy story. And also, as Nilda also said, that the sound of the breathing from the very beginning all through maybe. And also, when Neil was describing his father, having the same fate, that time the lighting that you used around Neil was very depressing for me. It can be a production question that we know that in UK it was shot in the United Kingdom, I think, where the light is already a problem.
We don't have any.
But at the same time, you may defend how much you try to bring the audience very much into the gloominess, as well as give them some space to also come out. You could bring some light, some more colors, maybe. So in that regard, you may say something.
I think just to say that in answer to your question, I think that there wasn't a lot of light, there wasn't a lot of colour in his present day life, but there was in terms of his blog, yes, and in terms of his love for his child and those moments. So we tried to use that as much as we could to give that sense of freedom. But I think something very interesting happened when we realised that we had to work with limitations, because in a way, initially we tried to film outside the house, but it wasn't right. And then we realised actually we have to completely limit ourselves to his wallpaper, his floral curtains, the view from his window. That's his universe. And to, in a way, enter, it's like the tree shot, that we enter these really ordinary details with such a sense of fascination that, in a way, this becomes everything. So that is what we did. And I don't think it's either depressing or not depressing, it just is.
And about the sound of the breathing?
Yeah, and I think there is an element of grading decisions as well as filming at the time. You know, we had to grade it to match with what was outside, that's right, and obviously that was part of it. But in terms of your question about who was he as a person and how did the film end, I mean, these are big questions to ask, and I think he ended the film, I think, as a hero, in that the very thing he was struggling with at the beginning, which was to communicate in his blog. 2 days before he died, he communicated a blog where he insisted on having the camera present. So he controlled how he was seen. And in fact, we weren't there, it was his aunt or his cousin who was filming. And he basically narrated his last blog where he describes his decision to die. And he does so with humour and with an incredible courage, but he also does so publicly with the camera. So in a way, I think the film gave him some kind of sense of a future, and that also was something that he began to control at the end. And became part of his story of his dying. I mean, he actually wanted us to be there. So he in a way had what he set out at the beginning to have, which was this sense of actually reaching as big a number of people as he could. But of course it was incredibly painful and hard for the family, and you know. But one of his ambitions when we were there was that he wanted to be naked on the side of the bus in London. And actually that's what happened. when the film came out, there was a huge campaign, in fact, all over the world. We showed the film in 50 countries, including here, actually. They showed it, and actually in London they made these huge posters and put them all over the tube. And he was in the front page of The Independent. The headline above the thing was "How a Dying Man Taught Me to Live," and she was in chat shows in America, in Britain, in Canada, all over the place. So in a way, he managed to do what he wanted to do. So I don't know how he managed to make us do what he wanted to do, but he did somehow.
Okay, now, Emma, now really we have some crisis with time. So we have to really improve our sense of time now. Just one last question. It's just I'm reading something, and it's very simple answer. No, it's very simple questions, but I want a profound answer. Okay. Becoming earth, becoming animal, becoming in this manner wholly human. So now, after this film, could you really feel and trust and believe in yourself that you are becoming fully animal, human?
That would be nice. Maybe that's why I make films.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Paul, for such a wonderful evening with us. Thank you so much. I was really amazed. Yeah, thank you so much. By both of you, I must say. Thank you, Boris, audience also for Paul Powers. Thank you for your compliment.